Alright, so the last 3 episodes we talked about shutter speed, we talked about aperture, and we talked about ISO inside your camera. Now let's talk about how all those things come together to form what is going to be your end image. We talked in the first week about shutter speed, and that's the amount of time that the camera is open to look at something and take an image. And we talked about in the second week how our aperture can be changed to modify the amount of light traveling through the lens into the camera. And then we talked about ISO and how we change the camera's sensitivity to light. Now, all 3 of those things are what come together. I mean, of course, there's a lot of other things that go into picture taking, but all those 3 things come together in a magic little dance, if you will. Now let's go through some scenarios and let's talk about how we might set the camera for each one of these scenarios. Let's go outside. First of all, we have a lot of light, and let's say we're taking a picture of the Grand Canyon. Now we're on one side of the Grand Canyon and we have a couple people posed on the rim of the Grand Canyon, and we want to take a picture that has the whole Grand Canyon in focus. Now from our week 2 video, you know that if we increase our f-stop or bring that little eye, that little hole in the lens down smaller, we get more things in focus. We get a better depth of field. So that's what we want to do for this situation where we're taking a picture of somebody up close and the Grand Canyon far away. We would want to increase our f-stop as much as we could. Now, that is going to result in a couple things. One, we're either going to have to slow down our camera, slow down the exposure. Instead of taking something that's a really fast exposure, we might have to slow it down a little bit. Now, the thing that makes that difficult is we're taking pictures of human beings. Human beings have a hard time standing still for a length of time. So if we slow our exposure down way too slow, somebody's just barely moving their hand is going to make their hand blur. So we have to keep our shutter speed at a certain point where taking a picture of a human being is going to be feasible and not result in them being blurred. Now, if our ISO is set too low and our shutter speed is set too high, we already know we're bringing this aperture way down, so we're decreasing the amount of light coming in, and we can't go too slow because we're taking pictures of human beings and they move. Then we're going to have to increase our ISO, our sensitivity to light, to get that picture to turn out. Now let's turn that around. Let's just say we're taking a picture of an individual and we want to have the entire background blurred out, but we just want that person in focus. Well, if you look at our week 2 video where we're talking about our aperture, we know we want to open that up way wide. Now, if we've just come from our Grand Canyon picture and we have our ISO way high, what we may find when we open that aperture up all the way is we're going to overexpose that picture. So we have to bring the ISO back down a little bit in order to bring that picture into a place where it's exposed properly because of all the extra light we've just brought in by opening up that aperture. Now, let's say you wanted to take a picture of a person playing basketball, and say you wanted to show that person is in motion. So this is where our shutter speed can come into effect, and we want to blur some things to make it look like somebody's in motion. You've seen the effect. You've seen the effect of a bicycle going by. The background is completely still, but whatever your subject is blurred. Well, that's where we can get into slowing down the shutter speed to where it opens for a little bit longer than we normally would for a picture like that. Now, here's the other part that makes all this a whole lot of fun is, remember when I talked about human beings unable to stand still for very long? Well, that goes for our hand too. Oftentimes when we start slowing down our shutter release speed, we're also increasing the opportunity that we can shake the camera and cause a little blur. So if you find yourself in one of those situations where, hey, I want a low ISO and I want a low shutter speed with a wide open aperture, then you may have to go to a tripod to hold the camera, or what some people will use, a monopod where it's just touching the ground at least to give you some stability. The slower you get that shutter, the more likely you are to blur the image in some way. And an image blur may be exactly what you're going for in certain circumstances. But if you want a still background with a moving subject, then you'll have to go with something like a tripod to compensate that. So finally, let's talk about a dark situation. Now, you can be in a dark situation where you're taking a picture of something that is still. Let's just say you want to take a picture of a lightning bug, and you've set up your camera on a tripod, or maybe you're even hand holding it. It's very dark. You open up your aperture all the way with the lowest f-stop possible to allow as much light to come through as possible, and you've sped up your shutter speed a little bit, but the picture's still a little bit dark. Now you can slow it down to a certain point, but if you're using it in your hand, of course, you're going to have image movement. You're going to shake the camera or whatever, and a lot of cameras today have vibration reduction and all that stuff in the lens and in the camera. So in that scenario, if you have your aperture all the way open, you have your shutter set at a speed that's pretty good but not quite bright enough, but you don't want to go any faster because the picture will get darker, you can increase your ISO to make that camera more light sensitive and allow you to get that picture you're going for. Well, I hope this little mini-series has been helpful to you in some way. I hope you've learned something. I hope you get to the point where you can take your camera out of auto and put it in manual and take your good pictures and make them incredibly great. We all have the ability to tell a story through the pictures we take, and the better they are, the better that story is. So thanks for watching. Thank you for being a part of this little series. I hope you learned something through all this, and take care.